that have so graciously visited us from around the world. My name is Krista Stanford, and I'm assisting Hadley today for this semester, who is this semester's LADP Speaker Series graduate student coordinator. The mission of the series is to engage with leaders in the allied design professionals and give students a valuable opportunity to hear from and interact with these lauded individuals, learning from their great expertise. This talk will be recorded and can be found on the USU LADP media website, and we encourage the use of this valuable resource both by students and any members of the public. Thank you for your respect for our speaker today as well as for those around you. We ask you to please keep any talking or digital distractions to a minimum and to always remain in your seats for the entire duration of the presentation. If there's any remaining coming after the talk, a short Q&A will follow, so please save any questions for that time. Following this, the attendance code for class credit will be given on the projector. You are also invited to reconvene upstairs in the LADP Common Studio for light refreshments, where you may meet our guests and asking other questions you may have. As a land-grant institution, we would like to acknowledge that the Utah State University campuses and centers reside and operate on the historic territories of the 8 tribes of Utah. The Logan campus is situated on the Shehezagoi, or Willow Valley, of ancestral lands of the northwestern band of the Shoshone Nation, where Native people have stewarded for thousands of years. We honor America's first people and their ancestors, past, present, and emerging, offering this reminder of Indigenous precedent. Today, we're honored to welcome our guest, Heather Henry, a leader whose work sits at the intersection of design, equity, and community well-being. Heather's career spans over 2 decades of impact across the Roaring Fork Valley and beyond. Originally from Connecticut, she brought her passion for people and place to Colorado 25 years ago, where she began her journey with Design Workshop. There, she managed projects across the country, eventually leading the Aspen office and spearheading the firm's sustainability initiative as the Legacy Environment Forum leader. In 2010, Heather co-founded Connect One Design, a visionary landscape architecture and planning firm tackling everything from affordable housing and childcare spaces to conservation and redevelopment. Now, as the Vice President of Housing and Childcare at Aspen One, Heather dedicates her full focus to the pressing challenges and connections between housing, childcare, and transportation, issues that shape the very fabric of our communities. Heather is not only a designer and strategist, but also a deeply committed public servant. She's held an elected office in Carbondale, helped establish the West Mountain Regional Housing Coalition, and has spent 25 years giving back to her community through board service, civic engagement, and coalition building. Today, she brings us a talk that challenges conventional thinking around the housing crisis. Rather than simply building more and building anywhere, Heather asks us to think smarter, more creatively, and act more responsibility about the where, what, and how of development. Please join me in giving me a warm welcome to Heather Henry.
Thanks. Appreciate it. I turned it on.
Nice. Yeah. There you go. All right.
I was told, well, I've never been called lauded before, so wow. Thank you so much for coming. I was told that I better be both kind of engaging and exciting because you guys are like on the down, burned out, been up for a few days, finishing all your projects in your studios. So I'll do my best. Yeah, thank you guys so much for inviting me, for having me here. It was a warm, warm welcome. We got to have dinner and lunch today and see you guys this evening. So I really appreciate the time. So we're going to go through a few things today. One, a little bit of my background, history, how I got to where I am, and then talk a little bit about this methodology for housing. And we talked with this title, The Right Place, the Right Home. So the idea to kind of contextualize both who we're trying to house and then really where we're trying to house them. So we'll go through methodology, how I've evolved that through the last 20 years, let's say, and then a little bit about putting that together to place and how you decide upon place. And then by the time we're done, we'll see where we are timing-wise, and we talk a little bit about financials. This is going to be a lot of information. Probably I go through pretty quickly. What I'd love to do is get through it, and you guys jot down some questions, and I truly love Q&A, so I hope we get there at the end. Okay. You did a great job really walking through. I didn't realize the intro would be that fabulously thorough. So I'll give you the personal highlights to what this looked like. I was born and raised in Connecticut. I spent 2 years at Fordham University in New York City, which was pretty wild for a farm kid from Connecticut, you know, dumped in the Bronx. And really trying to figure out the city and what that looked like, and some of it was amazing. You could hop a train and go into town and go to Broadway and get $20 tickets to a Broadway show. And then I experienced the violence of a very big city, and it was a very challenging, eye-opening, wonderful experience. When I had a professor tell me that perhaps I was going to be in print journalism. I love writing. I really wanted to be a journalist. And he spent some time with me, and then he looked at me and he said, I'm not sure you can set your ethics aside enough to go into communications and journalism. And I said, I think that's a compliment. And then I obviously had an identity crisis and wasn't sure what to do. So I went back to Connecticut, and I enrolled in UConn, the University of Connecticut. And I was wandering the halls of the natural resource school. I had been working in a greenhouse, and somebody snagged me. Peter Minuti snagged me. He'd been at the GSD at Harvard. And I have no idea why, other than I think he was just on a recruiting mission for landscape architects. And he said, what do you know about being a landscape architect? I said, I've never even heard of the word. I have no earthly idea. And we sat for about 2 hours in his office, and he told me all about it. And I thought, that sounds really cool. And so I enrolled, and fast forward. Todd said I should mention I played a little soccer while I was both at Fordham and the University of Connecticut. I think it was a wonderful experience to both be a part of a team and learn rigor and discipline that is required to play at the college level. So that really contributed, I think, to a lot of the skills that I brought. So I worked, after school, I worked for a little bit in Connecticut, a company called Slam. It's 3 dudes' names, and I could repeat them, it's not worth it. Multi-discipline, it was fantastic. I was only there about 1.5 years, but I learned to speak architect, and I learned to speak engineer, and it's like its own thing. You have to learn to speak it. And I got to do that. And I knew I wanted to leave Connecticut. I sat in on studio, and there was a conversation about networking. So a gentleman that worked in Connecticut at Slam had worked for Design Workshop. He'd worked there in the mid-'80s, knew all the people to know. He still knew Kurt Culbertson, et cetera. He encouraged me. Design Workshop was hiring about 1 billion people in the end of 1999. And I said, well, I could go for it. Unbeknownst to me, that individual called Kurt and some others and said, you should probably hire this person. I didn't have a portfolio to get a job at Design Workshop, not even close. And but I landed a job because I knew somebody. So it was great. And my dream came true. I got to move to Colorado. 10 years at Design Workshop. It both felt like a lifetime, and I learned about a lifetime's worth of information, experience, relationships, all the things. And I gave a lot, they gave a lot, that like blood, sweat, and tears. It was an amazing experience. And then things happen, right? Something happens that then you make that next leap. Well, for me, 2 things happened. 1, got married. 2, had a baby. 3, the Great Recession. Same class I sat in yesterday, there was like a little kind of, we were joking around, because some people were like, well, we were, eating cookies with our parents on the couch in the Great Recession. I got to live it about 10 years after being at Design Workshop, and it was so impactful. It was so hard. It was so challenging, and for me, it was an opportunity to rethink, reconsider what I wanted to do with my career. So I left Design Workshop and started with 2 other folks, Connect One Design. So, you know, like all great things, right? Microsoft, Apple, we started in my garage. So there were 3 of us. We started in the garage. And 10 years or so later, yeah, we went from garage and no projects yet to about $3 million in revenue. So really grew fast, grew exciting projects, got a lot of staff. It was an absolutely amazing journey. And towards the end, so we started Connect One Design in the depths of the recession. About 10 years later, by that point, the blink of an eye in many respects, the vocabulary came in, the housing crisis. It came out of the recession, there was no housing crisis, none. There was no new construction, there were no new homes being built, there was no new rentals being built. It just went ground to an absolute halt, right? Well, fast forward 10 years, the same reason you couldn't buy a 12-foot pine tree was the same reason we didn't have any homes, right? It doesn't happen right away. You saw this impact a little while later. So here we were about 10 years later, Connect One, bustling in the Roaring Fork Valley. So this is Western Slope, Colorado, anchored at one end, Aspen, anchored at the other end, Glenwood Springs. And not only there, but everywhere in the country, here was this vocabulary, the housing crisis. And it was this reflection, the ripple effect from the Great Recession and what had happened. We're still feeling it, now we're feeling it from COVID. Things have really sort of cycled. And we could sit here and have a whole presentation, right, about how it happened, why we are where we are right now with the housing crisis. For Connect One Design, it was fascinating. We would have conversations. We should have a little bit more layering. We had principals, we had project managers, we didn't really have any entry level. We can't hire entry level. We literally nowhere to bring them and house them, be able to feel like they could have stability, you know, where we are in the Roaring Fork Valley. Like, how do we do this? So, feeling the crisis. Okay. What else was I doing? There were these extracurriculars, some really fun things. Little side jaunt into starting a software as service for plants and plant database. That was an amazing journey. Successful in one respect, complete failure and flop in the other respect. As most failures are, you can learn a whole bunch of things from that. Also giving back to the community. So Planning Commission, Parks and Recreation, Town Council, critical piece. I was a founding member when I was on the Carbondale Town Council of our Regional Housing Coalition. So 3 counties, 4 municipalities, all coming together to say, not one of us can solve this housing challenge. So how do we do it together? So this culminated in this next big leap. I was on a committee with the coalition, and somebody said, hey, I work for, he was a friend of mine, I work for the largest employer in the Roaring Fork Valley, Aspen One. Aspen One basically is all of Aspen hospitality, so all of the high-end hotels in the valley. Aspen Skiing Company, so basically owns Aspen Mountain, Snowmass, Buttermilk, Highlands, Aspen Highlands, and a whole clothing line. So parent company to that, largest employer in the Roaring Fork Valley. For 4,500 employees in the wintertime, about 3,000 throughout the year. So huge employer, obviously a critical component of the housing issue. And he said, we just made this position, Vice President of Housing and Childcare, and we're hiring. It's a new position. We're putting a lot of money, a lot of resources behind solving this in the community. You know, Heather, if you know anybody, you should send them our way. And I was like, oh boy, do I know someone. And I sat back and I thought about it, and we were now 16 years at Connect One Design as the founding principal. And I said, I'm gonna leave the company I helped found, and I'm gonna go take this job. And I want to take the projects I was working on at Design Workshop and Connect One Design and these extracurriculars, and I want to see if I can put a singular focus to this housing crisis and see if I can have an impact. So that's how I ended up at Connect One, at Aspen One. So here's the thing. I don't think there's a singular focus for a landscape architect and a land planner, right? We don't singularly focus on literally anything. You think about the systems, you think about the design process, you think about all of that. There are so many layers to what we do. And part of this was kind of also feeling that legacy, right? One thing that Design Workshop imprinted on me as a very, very young professional was sort of this undeniable aspect and concept of just really giving a damn. Like giving a damn about humans, about the environment, about all of these components, and learning a lot about kind of that legacy. Well, what have we done in housing? And when you look at it, there was this legacy that was like, we have to correct this, right? It was this, it was fast, it was cheap, it was get housing, it was homogeneous, over-industrialized. We almost had this Henry Ford approach. How can you just do it as quickly as you can and get it into the ground? It was on cheap land, which often was polluted, everything else. So I really felt an important aspect of how to understand who are we trying to house, and then place, and then putting those two things together, trying to kind of correct, right, our course as we move forward in housing. This is one that I want you guys to really take in and absorb and use this language. So this is called the housing continuum. This is, of all the things that you take away, starting to digest this and really understand what this means. Because if you work in housing, likely you are finding some piece of this that you're going to work in, right? Whether it's designing, et cetera, you're working with a developer, there are people that are going to kind of work in this area of emergency shelters, transitional housing, really getting people safe and housed. And then you're going to have people that move into this middle segment, the affordability part. And then you're going to have people that are really working in kind of market. Market means free market. There is no subsidy. There's nothing. I am buying that. You are building it. When you build it, you're making a profit. So this is really important to understand. And at the end of the day, a healthy community, however large, however you define that, we were talking about that earlier. So for the Roaring Fork Valley, we would consider this healthy to be able to have a broad continuum and spectrum that met the needs of those that needed to be housed in our community, from Aspen really to kind of the Rifle area. So this is about a 70-mile stretch, let's say, something like that. Like this is rural, gateway communities out of Aspen as our resort. And how would we think about making sure that we had a continuum kind of throughout that area, and connecting it with transit and all these other things, right? Healthy, you know what this looks like, and you have places for people to be housed along this continuum. This is one of the important components. We could do a whole presentation, right? The last part of this is senior housing. What's happening after you have been in your home, you've had children, they've left, etc. You could do a whole presentation about this. So just remember that. You may have people that you're working with that are working on senior housing. There's a whole continuum in that component as well. We're not going to go into that today. So let's talk about what this means. So your housing continuum, I'm going to start at that end. This is pretty much traditional development. And so this is when you talk about the financial model for the market rental, market ownership, etc. Here, okay? So this is, I built it. I probably borrowed some money to build it. I now need to sell it to pay the debt for what I borrowed to build it and make a profit, okay? So that's pretty traditional, right? Go borrow, build it, sell it. So at this point, you can still have affordability. So when someone is saying affordable housing, it doesn't always mean that you're subsidizing, there's government money, there's other components to it, okay? You can do market housing. You might be right-sizing it, it might be smaller, you might be selling it for something that fits an affordability characteristic for a community. This is why you're kind of using that language and understanding what that might mean. Now, when you kind of move to the next, where you're moving into the middle, this might be where you're hearing about and you're talking. It cost me this much to build this, okay? I can sell it or rent it for this. Somewhere in the middle is a gap, okay? And that's where you're starting to hear the conversation around gap funding. And then how does someone who's building that project, and when I say developer, if I say, how does that developer then, fill that gap? When we say developer, this can be a private developer. We know private development companies who are building affordable housing and make a lot of money at it. It can be communities, they're building affordable housing. It can be nonprofits, it could be Habitat for Humanity, you name it, right? But let's just say a developer. So there's a gap. You're building it for this, you can sell it and rent it for this, here's the gap. And that gap is filled any number of ways. So when we hear about low-income tax credit, a historical renovation tax credit, projects that put together those components, just a general subsidy, a HUD Section 8 voucher program, all of these things are to kind of fill that gap between what it takes to build and what it takes to sell or rent that project. Now, some of these are programs that basically help other corporations, so tax credit projects help other corporations. It's a way for them to participate in a tax credit program, lower their tax burden, et cetera. So not all of these are just a general subsidy to affordable housing. There's a lot of ways to layer. But when we're talking about that component, that's here. And usually that's because you're delivering something that really needs to cost something a lot lower than what it takes to build for it, okay? So we're going to kind of move into case study part. The Roaring Fork Valley, as I mentioned, we're Aspen. Let's say we're all the way to Rifle. This information that you're going to see is Rifle, Colorado. So Aspen, Colorado to Rifle, Colorado. This is our profile. So this is current data. When we say 100% AMI, this is basically what one middle income individual will make in our particular housing demographic, okay? So that is what you'd call 100% AMI, area median income. And then we go up from there, so upper and upper middle, upper income, and all the way down to low and very low income. So you think about this, and if you say, okay, based on the continuum, what does a healthy market look like? What would a healthy housing continuum look like for our area? It means that you would be able to, deliver likely. You have shelter and transitional. You have rentals that people are getting into. There's an affordability to both rental. You might have some entry homes so people can start to buy homes at a particular price that, they're early in their career, et cetera. They're kind of right in the middle, the type of job they have. And then really in generally all, and again, you apply this to anywhere, healthy housing continuum, you have people at the upper area of their income that are going to be purchasing homes. Okay, so here's what we need, here's what we have, it's healthy, everyone can kind of get into that housing continuum where they need to, they can get in and then move around in the housing continuum as they need to, et cetera. Well, instead, let's talk about our case study, and we're kind of framing and contextualizing this problem. This is what we have in the Roaring Fork Valley, okay? So let's just go in the middle. I'm this adorable family. And I'm actually making twice the area median income. So I should definitely be able to get in, buy a market home, kind of get out of rental. I'm able to move into that area, et cetera. That is a healthy housing continuum. Well, instead, these are the median home prices in Garfield County, which is kind of the lower end of the valley, the upper end of the valley, and Pitkin County. That is an M for million. So $3 million is the average home price. And that's going up by, anywhere between 5 and 10% as we go every year and a half or so. And then again, even in the lower portion of the valley, $300,000 more than I can or should or could possibly afford, even if I'm in the middle. Even if I make 3 times the area median income, I can no longer afford to buy a home. So we're starting to see at the far end of the housing continuum, something's a little broken here. We can't get those people into any kind of purchase situation for these homes. So what's happening? Well, all of those high net worth individuals are renting. They might be renting second homes that someone has as an investment or other investment companies, apartments that are going up, et cetera. So throughout the valley, it varies, but let's use Carbondale, which might be right in the middle. for a single bedroom, $2,500 for a bedroom. So this part of the market is now shoved into rentals, and they can afford it. So they can afford to rent for $5,000, $6,000, over $7,000 a month. And what that does is drive up the cost of rentals. And so now if I'm past this point, I can't even get into a rental. So we're broken, because basically it broke at this part, right, the right end of the housing continuum, and then it just kind of shoved the ripple effect all the way down. Our case study in this valley, again, this methodology, this is why whatever gateway community you're doing, you're getting this information. This is the first information you're getting. Is the continuum broken? If it is, where? Okay? So let's go back. So we kind of came to this housing continuum. All right, we can't do that. So everything's kind of getting shoved down. And are we forced then to say, okay, everything we're doing looks like this. For this, you know, I need to be renting it to people who can only afford this. I want to charge this because the market will accept that much, et cetera. Like, where's this gap? You know, do we have to build this and fill this gap on every project we do? And so just everything's kind of scrambled. So again, I could take an entire presentation that would say, what is the Aspen-Pitkin County Housing Authority doing, right? Like, what's Habitat Roaring Fork doing? Instead, what I'm going to do is say, okay, I now work for the largest employer in the valley. What are we doing? So what are we doing to help, right, our own workforce? And so then we kind of had to say, all right, we're going to contextualize this for our 4,500 individuals that work for us. What do they need? What do we have right now? And how can we kind of fill this gap? How can we help this? So what we focus on, because we're going to put the capital into most of our projects, we're going to say we're going to try to figure out how to build affordable rental, and we're going to meet this need here for our employees. So you go back to, we're continuing to try and figure out who are we, who are our employees. When I joined the company, remember that original slide and that, like, the homogeneous part? So there was very much a homogeneous approach to housing the employees of the Aspen Skiing Company and Aspen One. Well, the biggest part is seasonal. Let's just build a bunch of seasonal beds. It was like, okay, great. I mean, that's great. And, you know, what might we need in addition to that? So what we started to do was create personas. Any of you that have kind of gotten into marketing and things like that, you've heard this word. If you want to sell a widget, but you know that widget kind of only sells to 15 to 25-year-olds, you know, with blue hair, right? You're going to kind of create a persona of that person, and then you might say, all right, we need some more personas. That's a pretty small market. So, but that's the whole idea of personas. You're trying to kind of break something down into smaller pieces. So that's what we did with our employees. And we said, how many of all these do we have? So when you looked at Persona A, that was a seasonal employee. That was someone that was coming in. They have no idea how to get housing in our valley. They had the highest need. They needed a place to go. They need a bed, and that's really what they need. And they're pretty excited to share. Usually it's a little like dorm housing, like, sure, I'm into it, you know, and I would love to have roommates. I'd love to have friends, kind of this immediate, you know, network of people, et cetera. So they're really lower tenure. They don't have a super high hourly rate, right? So they need a really affordable rental. And then we got into B, and B was, okay, a lot of the same characteristics, but you do work for us 12 months a year. And then we kind of went up from there, and then we had C, and you work for us all year, but you've been here longer. On the housing continuum, you've been with us more than 5 years. You're probably thinking about or have a partner. You might even be starting to think about a family. You're not going to live in that same dorm, right? Like, you want to be on this housing continuum. You want to find the next place, et cetera. D, Aspen One is a company that wants to cultivate from within. We love to see people grow, take advantage of the education, and move from an hourly to a manager and a director and a vice president someday. And the company really loves that and rewards that. But if at each of those stages you have nowhere to live, you have nowhere to go, that's when we lose people. They were leaving. Well, I need a 2-bedroom now or a 3-bedroom. I have 2 kids. I have a family. And so we were really breaking this down. And then if you look, it was like, and what's the number? Like, how many of this do we have? So this was basically our internal employee market study, okay? Who is it? What do they need? These were our personas. And then we did a gap analysis. We did it for every single persona. So this said, all right, persona B, here's what we think we have and can add using some other means, methods. Well, this is basically, here's what we need to build. Like, here's what we're missing if we're gonna stabilize our own workforce with the housing they need on the housing continuum. We need to add this. So the gist of this market study, as you went through, and we did this for every single persona, was the culmination was a 10-year strategic housing plan. And it essentially said we need 200 beds for kind of that persona A and B, and we need to figure out how and where to build 400 units in our valley. And this was units all on the spectrum of 1 bedroom to 4 bedroom, and people that could afford less and afford a little bit more, and how do we find that mix? So we were able to create that market study internally. Again, you go anywhere. If you want to go to your gateway communities, you're going to go to a neighborhood within the city. This is part of what you have to sort of expose to truly say, we're going to do affordable housing. That's awesome. What does it actually look like? Who are you trying to house? So this is all the who, okay? So then, where? Where are you going to put them? And when you put them there, what's it going to look like? And how do you kind of match all these things together, right? Here's our easy singular focus as landscape architects and land planners. It's a piece of cake. Let's just do affordable housing. No problem. So let's case study. Now we talk about place. We know who, we know what they need, where, okay? So hopefully you guys are starting to see things like this, right? Where you're doing site suitability, okay? So across the top was a whole bunch of properties. Some of these land that we owned as a company, land that we might be able to purchase, opportunities to partner with someone, etc. Left-hand side, how do I evaluate that that was a good place? How do I not just say, you know what, I'm going to put it on the other side of the railroad tracks because the land is cheap. Well, you know what, the other side of the railroad tracks is a food desert, and there's no transit. And that was kind of, right, the legacy that we're trying to make sure we get away from. So instead, how do I look at this suitability? Okay, so we had all these characteristics. We were talking about this at lunch, what we're trying to do to get our employees out of their vehicles. And there's an ulterior motive, there's no question. Where our folks work, they might live here, here, and here. Where they work, they can't park a car either. So certain criteria for us were just absolutely critical. How many components of alternative transportation can we get on this particular property? And if it meant, you know what, that's a tough buildable area, it's steep, it's this or that, we would take that site if it then had alternative transportation. So you're able to use this, right, to kind of objectify the right sites and where you want to do your project. But there also might be some criteria that really rise to the top. And for us, that was how we evaluated sites. So we have 1,300 beds right now. So this is existing that we own, manage, lease, et cetera, about 450 units in the Roaring Fork Valley. So I picked 3 projects as case studies, okay? Where we took, who are we trying to house, what is the site, and then how do you put that together? And they are gonna look significantly different. And a lot of that is because it's making this connection between the who and the what and the where, right? The right place, the right home, and you put them together. And there's so many factors, and this is where you guys shine. This is where you're gonna provide value. This is where you're gonna walk out of here and be like, affordable housing? Oh yeah, I can do that. And I can do that in a way that fits with your neighborhood, your community, et cetera. So the first case study has affectionately now been named and branded Tiny Town, and you're gonna see why. And I love this one first, and I also hate this one, right? Because how many times have we heard like, oh my God, tiny homes is the end-all, be-all solution of affordable housing. I mean, in the rural communities, in our gateway communities, there's no question, hands down. Just put in some tiny homes. How about some tiny homes? Can you do tiny homes? There's a reason. They're inexpensive. You'll see here, they're fast. So that aspect of like fast and cheap. But still, let's figure out how to do those in the right place. That might be a great solution. So this campground right in the middle of the valley, so about 20 miles outside of Aspen. The campground could accommodate about 100 RV spaces, something in that realm, and was a functioning campground. It was a KOA at one point. And so the owners purchased it and said, okay, now what could we do here? So land use, if we wanted to do anything else, an extremely protracted process, either change the code, right, change the regulations, go get a planned unit development approved, et cetera. 3 years. And where I live, if you were lucky, 3 years later, you'd put the first shovel in the ground. So we said, this was the outline, kind of this whole area. Best version we had, I think I had like off the Wayback Machine or something. So this was kind of the campground. This is the main spine, bus stop right here for actually our bus rapid transit. So just up here, it was starting to get connected with our the valley-wide bike share, et cetera. So we had all that alternative transportation. Great site. It had all of our electricity. It had sewer and water. It had all the things. It was a really great RV park. And so we said this might actually be the place. Basically, we could do tiny homes that stayed chassis connected, had vehicle license plates, et cetera. Still do, essentially. We don't put them on the homes, but we have them on file. And we could start moving in tiny homes immediately. And for each tiny home, we could bring in 3 beds. So it went back to this. We were like, well, what's this really a solution for? Okay, this is not a solution here, but look, we have 3,500 employees in just Persona A and B that we've got to find stable housing for. This could be a great solution. And so here we had the right site. We could move in, we could say, how do we do this tiny home retrofit and create a community, create a sense of place, create gathering places, create really comfortable spaces, et cetera. And so this is, again, this is Highway 82, next the valley, up and down, Glenwood at one end, Aspen at the other, bus stop here, giant WeCycle station is our bike share, about half a mile down to the Whole Foods, the city market, movie land, all the entertainment, restaurants, et cetera. So you kind of had all these pieces of the puzzle, and we could do this one really quickly and do this retrofit. So it was a great connection. Community space in the middle, you had open space, kind of tiny home, so you had small space inside. Let's make sure everybody can spill out and have some really beautiful open spaces on the outside. Great finishes on the inside, super durable, comfortable. Everybody could have their own space, even if they were sharing bedrooms, lots of storage, et cetera. So you could really kind of say, all right, this is the right place to do this solution. You'll see these next case studies. If you took that solution and put it in this place or vice versa, it just doesn't work. So you can see basically like here next to us, this is a property next door, which is a mobile home park. This is kind of a live-work area, but small units, just that context. And these are the tiny homes sitting in that context. So it kind of felt like, hey, you really did retrofit our community. And in the meantime, you met this really great affordability factor for that persona A and B. Okay, the next case study. Totally different. Here's the context. Okay, so the property we're looking at was Block 9. It was ready-made, it was zoned, it would have been 3 stories of just market, either for sale, for rent, et cetera. That's what it was zoned for. And this was the context at the time. So this is the Whole Foods, basically, this is the Whole Foods here. Again, bus rapid transit is directly next to the Whole Foods. We had all of the bike share. These were all going to be development sites, again, of 2-3 story. It was kind of that rural urban context, right? So do you walk in here and say, oh, you know what, tiny homes? Like tiny homes are the solution. Like absolutely not. So what was the context? How are we kind of creating that right home that was still going to fit what we needed? So this is interesting at the time. Here's some of the context, right? This was right next door. We were still having this conversation of like, we still need these beds. We need it in the biggest area of our employees. We're still gonna kind of fit into this A and B persona. It's still our greatest need. And so that's what we did, but we did it with this, right? So then you could put this into the kind of that rural urban, 3 stories. We did it as a shared unit style, so 4 bedrooms, big shared common kitchen, common living room, great bedrooms, lots of storage, same thing, but not in tiny homes. Now you were doing it in this really cool building. Downstairs is a laundry and a little community space, etc. This is the interior, so you can see the same thing. You kind of get those really good finishes, that same quality that you're trying to make sure that you give someone for that stable place where they can feel comfortable. One person loves the tiny home. We have the other people who love the hub. And some, it's I want to be in that context. Others, they want to be in the context of the tiny homes. And it's a great fit. Okay, our last case study. So now we're taking a big step back because at this point, we have to find more significant projects. When we put this stake in the ground to say 400 units, like where are we going to find that? We were not going to find that on Block 9. We're not going to find that retrofitting RV campgrounds, right? So the last case study, 20 acres, and this is, you guys are like privy to really fabulous confidential project at this point. So I won't tell you where it is, but it's in the Mid-Valley. So 20 acres, it is zoned as well. So it is zoned for about 111 units and adjacent to a lot of like a single family neighborhood on one side. There's a plant nursery on the other. So this is our site here. And basically, again, you kind of have all of this proximity to the services. So when you looked at that suitability diagram, is this the right place? Are we putting it way up on the mountain where everybody has to get into a car, but the land is cheaper? Like, nope. We're going to put this down. There's a bus rapid transit here at this intersection. You've got entertainment, the movie land, bowling, Whole Foods, a city market. Across the street this is basically the largest outdoor recreation facility in the whole valley. So now we said, okay, what is this really going to start to fit? And so we'd done so much work in that A and B persona. It's now time to the rest of our workforce. These are folks, you know, senior directors, they've been with us 15 years. Remember, they still can't rent on the free market. They still can't buy on the free market, okay? So we've got to start to house these folks. So we're about to break into a whole different realm now of not kind of project by project, but the creation of an entire neighborhood. So this is culmination of only about 2 months of work. This was strictly out of our due diligence, again, hot off the presses. Basically being able to create mixed density all the way from 1 bedrooms to 4 bedrooms in apartments, 3 stories to 2 stories to townhomes where folks have, again, their own space, moving into really style units, some of their own private outdoor space, etc. So moving all the way into a whole new project, but this fits, right? We're not trying to take the hub and put it in here where it's a lot of high density. You've got, if you go back, right, we've got this kind of single family next to us here. We've got a little bit of industrial with a plant nursery and a bus barn. And, you know, so how do you kind of take that context and make sure you're fitting within that as we create our own neighborhood adjacent to it? So that's how we got to this project here. Again, trying to kind of put the right fit into the right place. Quick 3D models. What we're able to do actually is also land bank some of the 20 acres. We hope with some upzoning, so if we have 100% workforce, we'll be able to do a phase 2 that would put in up to 50 more units, something like that. So that's kind of putting the right place, right home, etc. And you have a whole nother layer to this, okay? So quick case study on Mid-Valley project. So this project. We had a whole conversation about how we're going to kind of fill that gap. So even for us, as we build a project, we can only rent it to our folks for this amount of money. So even for us, what are we going to do with that gap? And so there was a really great conversation, and this is something, again, I'm just going to kind of lob this out there to you guys to get you thinking about it, get the juices flowing. But when you talk about how to fund those projects and that gap, right, when we're talking about affordability, et cetera, there's a balance. There's these levers that you're kind of pulling. The primary one being control, right, and capital. So how much money I want to put into a project versus how much control over the units that I want to have. So when we're using public mechanisms to help fund our affordable housing projects, if you're a private developer or private project, you're going to start to lose control. So the more funding that comes from the public, the more that housing has to be open to the public. So it's kind of a balancing act between the two and all these levers that you see up here. It can be as simple as that as you talk about it. This could also be like a 2-hour presentation as well around how to fund housing, but just kind of thinking about it from that perspective. If as Aspen One, I want to put my employees in all of those units, as a private employer, I'm going to have to pay to build every single one of those units. If I want to kind of combine my project and provide some to the community, to anyone in the workforce in the Roaring Fork Valley, I can look to use some other mechanisms of public funding. And then I can have those units open and then have the units I've effectively paid to build and put my employees into that. So you're going to find that balance. And so we were having that conversation as a company as well. How are we going to move forward on this Mid-Valley housing project? That balance. And we don't have an answer yet. That project is very new. We're still having that conversation. What's the right amount to do a project that's we control, we are clear we put our employees in, and do we want 111 units that's, you know, all our employees? No matter what, you're always going to have spouses and families, and, you know, so you're always providing housing for the community. But it's a great conversation, and it's one that we're continuing to have. So think about that, right? How am I putting capital in? How much control do I want over the project? And this was the spectrum that we looked at. So again, when you have this, you guys will be able to look at this when you get the slides. But on the left-hand side was we're going to privately fund the whole thing. We're going to have all the ownership. We're also going to have to pay to maintain everything, you know, you name it. Somewhere in the middle, you can think about how to use a nonprofit ownership model, bring in some public funding, have the rest that we've put in the capital, and you have some flexibility. And on the right-hand side, this is a particular mechanism in Colorado called the Middle Income Housing Authority, and it's a way to put public funding into a project. And so we could build that entire project with something like that, but we couldn't just designate the units for our employees. We would have to say our employees might get a little bit of preference, but this is mostly going to be a community workforce housing project. Okay? So these are the models that we're looking at while we're having this conversation of how to do that. I'll do like 1 minute. So basically, you know, this was all about like building housing. And look, there are a ton of mechanisms out there for how you can impact each of these areas on the housing spectrum. Buy downs, rental assistance, down payment assistance, a huge menu of things. So those are all, again, this is that thing where we could talk about that for a whole nother hour of all the programs that are out there. But kind of always thinking about that. And for us, we're thinking about how to build housing, and we're also thinking about how to help participate in the community with all these other solutions, because we also want, because we're working kind of right here, building affordable rental, we want to make sure as the largest employer in the Valley, we're also helping the community wrestle with some of these other areas, some of these other programs to make sure that that housing continuum throughout our geographic area is healthy. There's opportunities throughout, even if we're, you know, focusing our build kind of right in that affordable rental. So lots of information, lots of case studies. And like I said, I think the critical component is how do you look at just these processes and these methodologies, and you can use those anywhere, anytime. Thanks. Q&A.
Yeah. Yeah, yes.
Yeah. There's a lot of talking. Oh, there's so much info. You guys must have at least one question.
Can you hand me the?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, Todd, you're really going to start?
Well,
Go put me on the spot.
fantastic presentation, and you know, I always think about, I was touring for, with some parents of a prospective student came into the studio, and I'm looking at them wondering if they know what landscape architects do, and you know, like all of us who came to this, we had no idea what we encountered. So you were always good at working really hard and figuring out complex solutions to complex problems. But you were also a good designer, and you were interested in planning design, and you're interested in forming spaces. So talk a little bit about what you give up to, you know, the design and the satisfaction you get from designing things to now
Making this
figuring
leap.
out really, you know, answers to complex problems that are more positively benefiting more people.
Yeah. So did you guys all hear that question? So what do you give up? And I think it's especially right making that leap from something like Connect One Design to where I am now, and Design Workshop. I think that design, right, in that small space design, there's a certain creativity. It's sometimes it feels like making a painting, right? Somebody gives you this plaza, or you know, we did the river park in basalt and the streetscape in basalt, and so you're kind of going in and you're doing the same thing. You're contextualizing the problem, right? You're looking at the who and the where and what kind of space does it want to be, and then you're creating a solution, a design solution. I think that the methodology in many ways is the same. The complexity may change, the factors that influence it, right? So these projects, we're figuring out how to pay for them, you know, who's going to live there, how are we navigating land use approvals, et cetera. So there's so many more layers, but in a way, the design process doesn't change all that much. I think this leap that I've made, the big D of design, feeling like you created a painting, right, in a plaza, or someone's home that you've designed, their landscape, that definitely goes away, right? So this is such a high-level version of the design process and how to put together much more complicated issues and problems, et cetera, to then the solutions. And so let's take an example of the Mid-Valley housing. By the time we're getting to designing the pads and the open spaces that we're going to do, and we've programmed a playground and some of those things, I won't be as much a part of it. I'm going to move on to figure out what the next project is where we can do kind of the next 200 units, and I'm going to be doing the due diligence and you know, reviewing all the legal issues with the property and, you know, meeting on land use and all of those things. So I think there's a scale component that probably I gave up to make this change, a detail. And so I think that's where figuring out what really revs your engine. But for me, that's what has always revved my engine, and Todd knows that, is the more complex, the more systems that needed to be figured out, the more I really enjoyed that. So the more it was into a detailed design or you know, residential, or you know, looking at how things can come together and that really just fabulous fine detail, you know, it was fun, and it also wasn't what I then wanted to get up the next day and the next day for, and this is. So you got to figure that out as a professional. Yeah.
So, how did the creation of the bus rapid transit affect the work that Aspen One does on the daily basis?
Yeah, awesome question. So as I mentioned, I think for our projects, the integration of parking and cars and single vehicle use is one of the primary site suitability components that we evaluate our projects on. And again, part of that is just our valley is highly, highly congested. That one spine that runs up and down our valley is almost every intersection is at least at a D. Those of you who know traffic studies and traffic impact, it's a little like your grades. A D and an F is not good. And so our valley, like most of these intersections and our stoplights are at Ds and Fs. And so we have to contribute to the solution and see how little we can contribute to the problem. So our Mid-Valley project, it's like the tiny homes in the hub. Those are all 20 miles from most of our primary like work centers, our ski areas, the hotels that are in Aspen and Snowmass. And so if we're trying to contribute to the housing crisis and provide housing, but then we also let everybody have their, 1, 2, 3, 4 cars, like whatever it is, well, I mean, we just like kind of tip the scales in one way, but then also the other. But you can't just say there's no cars. And so it's a real primary component for us. We contribute $500,000, to the RAFTA system, to the Roaring Fork Transportation Authority. We have our own shuttles that we provide, et cetera. So it really, how we've integrated with the transit system and now other components like WeCycle. I was talking with our group at lunch. We're trying to figure out how to do a genuine car share program like you would see in an urban setting. Hey, we want to go there in our like fabulous little valley. The BRT from RAFTA in the Roaring Fork Valley was the first rural bus rapid transit in the nation. When we Connect One Design did that project in 2010, basically. And so we've kind of been on that leading edge to make sure that transit is a huge component of the solution as well.
Okay, you said your company did that.
Sorry, Connect One Design did the RAFTA BRT previous company. Yeah. When I was at Connect One Design, we did the bus rapid transit sites.
So did Connect One plan and the route or transit development or what?
Did say the first part?
So did Connect One plan and the route and stuff or the Velociraptor, or did it just say here's what should be near the stations?
Yeah, we just did the sites. Connect One Design did the site design. That like level of design, that's what we got to do. We did the transit facilities themselves, bus stops up and down the valley.
Nice.
We designed those. Yeah, Connect One Design. Yeah. Yep. Thanks. Good questions. Anybody else? Anything? No? Yeah. Oh.
Who was that?
Oh.
Gail.
I can repeat the question too if you want.
Well, in like the last case study where you were trying to plan for more units than zones,
Yeah.
I thought that was really interesting.
Yep.
Can you explain more of like
Why?
your process moving forward and how you might hold on to like the project?
Yeah. So we would basically be purchasing all 20 acres, okay? And right now the property is zoned for 111 units. 111 units, if we were to spread it out all over 20 acres, we could lower the density quite a bit. However, we would really increase the infrastructure cost per unit. So if we put roads kind of all the way out and the parking all the way out onto that property. We also know in having a conversation with the county that they are potentially looking at basically incentives. If we were to fast forward 2 years from now, they're rewriting their code to take a 20-acre project like this and allow something more like 150 to 200 units. And so what we said is we'd like to get our project done sooner. We would like to not wait for you, county, to redo your code. We'd like to meet the code you have now, but be ready should you change the code to be able to add units in the future. So we kind of said, how could we, I mean, we're effectively calling it land banking. So how could we land bank some of the land, do our 111 units, wait for the county to make some of that project progress, engage with them in that process as they change their code, kind of, hey, you know, on the quiet, we could be a little bit of a case study for you guys if you want to look at actually how to upzone projects that are 100% workforce. And then be ready a couple years from now to say, this is now the zoning, we're going to take the rest of this property and put in, you know, the delta between the zoning now and what they might do as an upzone. So that's kind of our plan. Again, hot off the presses, so TBD if they like that idea, and they're going to let us go there. But yeah, that's kind of our thought. Did you have a question?
I was just curious, as a student.
This is just recording.
Sure. As a student, I guess if I ever wanted to get into like housing and policy and stuff like that, what would you suggest the best ways of going about that? Just kind of get a head start, because I'm guessing you didn't go out your degree thinking you'd be getting into housing and stuff like that.
Right, yeah, I definitely didn't. It's a good question. I think that, you know, either looking at that right now and, you know, what's being taught in different classes, et cetera, that might be around policy. I think generally what you guys are getting as a basis for your education, I mean, you saw this, right? That site suitability, a lot of that stuff, I'm hoping not new, and if you're not there yet, you will be, right, after a couple more years. So you're really getting a lot of the basis for this. I certainly did. I think if you really want to move into, let's say, policy and things like that, as an education, starting to dive into a little bit, whether it's public policy or whether it's the financial components, you know, you can really look at paths that would help you focus on those particular components. Personally, I'd encourage you kind of stay pretty broad and general. I mean, when you look at that housing continuum, there are so many places to engage. There are people that specialize in the transitional housing and, you know, early entry community housing, right? How you get people out of transitional and they're just kind of beginning to be in rental, et cetera. There's people obviously that focus on market. And so I think it depends on where you want to go. The more general you stay right now and just get a lot of exposure, a lot of experience, you know, think about how these components come together and then what interests you, and then you can kind of head off into different areas.
I can't avoid the networking opportunities. So Galen Goldbrecker
Yep.
is an internship candidate for working for Heather Henry next summer, next summer. And
Yep.
then that student, let's just take it back to any student, we get the benefit of a passion for something that took somebody 20 years of extremely hard work. This woman works extremely hard. And that opportunity to make that connection would be, we can talk about it.
Yeah, and the gentleman that's working for me now, he started basically, yeah, he was an intern, and it was a very specific research project. We went out to find someone because, again, we didn't get into it, this was already a lot, but we're now moving into off-site construction methodologies. So whether it's full box volumetric, right, that are gonna come in, say, for the Mid-Valley project, you know, stack boxes, or whether it's panelized, et cetera. So he came in doing a very specific research project for us and then stayed on. And so now he's been there 2 years, and he's one of my housing project managers. It's a great way to do it. And, you know, look, there are so many places that would love that. You name it.
Keywords for students are, this is the first one and the biggest one in the country. This is something I'm interested in. You're at Utah State, you're learning from some of the best professors in the country.
Yeah.
If you get connected to the best, who's operating at the highest level, that's the quickest way, right? She had to go through starting a company, working for me. I mean, a lot of pain. Get where she is, right?
So much pain.
Right?
Right to it. And we're always behind on, you know, the idea of innovation versus what we have the capacity and the resources to do. I mean, the car share, I'd love to have somebody tomorrow that could do the research for me and all those other pieces. So, yeah, buddy.
Thank you.
Yes, please. That's okay. I'll stay as long as you guys want. I don't know. I don't need any snacks. I'm fine.
Going along with kind of his question and just what you were talking like advice-wise, would you recommend any like sources, media, like again just for those starting steps? So,
Any what now?
like media sources to like look into, or things like again just those like maybe starting steps to start to learn more about it, because this was insanely helpful for me at least, because again I really have never learned about this before. So yeah, any advice there, I guess.
Yeah, I think again it goes to where you want to start. I'd love for you guys to take away that concept of the housing continuum and genuinely start to research that piece. It's a big part of where I started too, say just 5 years ago probably. As we started the Regional Housing Coalition, we were trying to figure out what it meant. That was a big aha probably for me, because again, on that last slide, there are so many programs that fall out of like understanding the housing continuum. It's not just all about development. So I think that piece, and I mean, you just plug that in and start researching what it means. It leads you to your own state. I mean, right now you guys are here and that's your state, but you probably all have places you came from. And so it leads you to like, what programs are there in my own state? And you're kind of making the connection. Well, how does that fit into the housing continuum? Where are we still seeing gaps? You know, where do we feel like we're leaving a lot of people behind in terms of how they can be housed, et cetera? So I'd love for you guys to just like burn that part into your brain, because I think it also will help you understand how you use that to determine a market in a particular area. And again, it's just that needs assessment and just doing it for yourself, right? Like my own needs assessment. Well, I was with Todd and we did the real estate like presentation, right? So we got first place. Like I know that market part. I don't know what transitional housing is. I don't know what that means. So I want to really go like dig into that piece, or I want to understand the gap funding idea. How do you fill that gap? What are those funding methods? And so I think if you use the housing continuum as a basis to then just dive deeper into the pieces of that, it's a great start.
Thank you. Thank you. I think if you have any more questions, we're going to go up to the common studio, but I'd like to thank you all for your respect and staying for the entire duration of the speech. Please remind other people to stay for the entire time, even if it does run a little bit over. But we'd like to thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, no, my pleasure.
And answering
Thank
all
you
of our
guys.
questions. And let's give it one more hand for.
Thank you guys. I love the invite. Thanks, everybody.